We raised more than $38 million and engaged more than 70,000 donors and volunteers. And that generosity couldn't have come at a better time because it helped make it possible for us to lead through the crisis and begin providing immediate relief so that many in our community could be well served. One of the things that sets the United Way apart is their dedication to transparency. So you can have complete confidence in how your donations directly impact our community. And during the next hour, we're going to continue with that spirit of openness and transparency through this virtual town hall. We'll be having a discussion about how United Way responded to the demand for human services during the first few months of the crisis, what we need to do as we move forward, and how you can be part of the recovery. This town hall would not be possible if it wasn't for our corporate sponsors, so I'd like to thank them now. Our premier sponsors, Highmark Health and UPMC, as well as our supporting sponsor, the Small Auto Group. We greatly appreciate your support. So let's get started. Joining me today is Bobbi Geer, CEO of United Way of Southwestern Pennsylvania, Bobbi and I will be discussing many of the questions that have been on a lot of minds, and we'd also like to encourage you to be part of the conversation. So please use the Q&A function to ask the questions that are on your mind, and we will do our best to be responsive as much as we can. And by the way, there's well over 450 people on this virtual call today, or this virtual town hall. So feel free to get in line quickly because Bobbi has promised she'll answer every single question that anybody has. So Bobbi, welcome and congratulations on a successful campaign. How you doing?
I'm doing well, David, and it's so good to see you, and likewise, right back at you on the successful campaign. We could not have done it without yours and Cindy's leadership, and it was so critically important to us this year.
Well, I mean, we appreciate that, and we appreciate all the hard work that you and the team did and all the volunteers as well. So let's talk about the community for a few minutes, and maybe we can work through a couple of questions, and then we'll certainly open it up as we get through. But from your vantage point, because you sit in a whole different seat than the rest of us, what's been the impact on COVID-19 and the pandemic on the community, and how have you thought about it and its impact on the United Way?
Well, I think it's really important to think about and to recognize that even pre-pandemic, without a pandemic in our community, about half of our community residents really struggle daily. About half of Americans, if they're faced with a $500 unexpected expense, really have difficulty recovering from that. So when you layer in a pandemic, which is first and foremost, a health crisis, and then an economic crisis on top of that, it's really laid bare some of the problems that United Way has been trying to address for years and years. And when you add in, then there are a lot of newly vulnerable people. So people were struggling pre-pandemic. Now we're seeing a lot of people who, for the first time, are unemployed. They're struggling with their health. Older adults who were otherwise pretty independent and active really can't be out now because they're more vulnerable, and people with disabilities. So it's been this dual impact of people who were already struggling and then adding in people who are newly struggling. And that has had a tremendous impact on the services and the partner agencies that United Way supports to be able to provide those services.
Well, that's what I was going to ask next was, obviously you convene and help coordinate with a lot of partner agencies. What has been the impact on the partner agencies, and what's happening there?
Oh, so certainly it's been a tremendous impact. So we support in the region almost 100 different nonprofit organizations who deliver human services, and not unlike what we're all experiencing, their funding sources, they've not been able to hold events. A lot of what the funding they receive is predicated on the numbers of people that they serve. They get funding from other resources that has really been reduced. And so they're seeing an incredible increase in the services that they're providing at the same time that they're not able to raise funds and to garner those funds to provide the services. So it's really a double whammy for them. And we have really been staying in close touch with our partner agencies, calling on them and surveying them and asking them what we can do to help alleviate some of this burden that goes beyond the typical grants that we provide to them. But it has been an incredible strain for them, and to think about how they can provide those services in a different way. Right? So we can't be together. And how do you help an older adult not be socially isolated if you can't be with them? And so our partner agencies have just been incredible through this. And we're doing our level best to stay in close touch and support them in any way that we can.
So we're 5 months into this, and obviously we look at it from the healthcare perspective as well as the community perspective. You've seen it from that different seat that you sit in. How is it different now than it was in the early days or the early stage of this crisis? Because it sure does seem like we're running a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And we've really seen, initially when we all went home on March 13th and we didn't really understand how long this might be with us, it was really about people wanting information and understanding what COVID-19 was and information about what precautions they could take or what the symptoms were. And then we distinctly moved into this phase of the pandemic where people were losing their jobs. They were unable to pay their bills. They were unable to meet their basic needs. And then layered into that was all of the circumstances around racial justice and social justice and racial inequity. And so I've really described this has really been a tale of three crises all together, all at once: the health crisis, the economic crisis, and the racial and social justice crisis. And we at United Way have been responding to all three of those in different ways and through the phases of the pandemic.
So somebody described it to me as it's like having two Category 5 hurricanes happen simultaneously and converge on all of us. And so it certainly has to change the way we work at Highmark Health. How has it changed the way that your team is working and has been affected by this?
So, as I mentioned, like many other businesses and organizations, we gathered the team on March 13th and sent everybody home to work remotely. And so that's been a tremendous shift. But on the morning of March 14th, we got a call from Allegheny County asking us, can you help with all the calls that are coming in for information? And so not only did we send everybody home to sort of set up shop in their bedrooms and their dining room tables, but we also had to ramp up 211 literally overnight to be able to help the county and the region deal with all the questions and concerns and the need for information. So one of the key ways that it changed the way we worked is that we didn't have 30 extra people sitting around waiting to be called upon to staff 211. So guess who did that? The dedicated team members of the United Way staff raised their hands and said, I'll be trained to be a 211 resource navigator. I'll take texts. I'll take calls. I will, monitor chats. And they signed up for shifts, 24/7 to be able to train up and do that. So, fortunately, as time has worn on through the pandemic, we've been able to staff up more, and our staff team has been able to return to some of their more typical duties. But we would not have been able to make it through that first month or so without the staff really jumping in and being trained to do a job that was completely different than the one they signed up for.
There are so many extraordinary people in the region who have stepped into the breach and dealt with this pandemic, and certainly your folks have done that. I do have to tell you that one of the most humbling experiences for Cindy Hunderfing and I was the day you took us, along with Linda John and others, to the 211 center, and we sat and listened to calls. The variety of the calls, the depth of despair, the sense of urgency was just extraordinary. So I can only imagine it's become much more difficult. So I encourage anyone who has the opportunity to go listen to some of the calls and be a part of that, because it will definitely change you.
Yeah.
So you obviously have a big job delivering services and supporting, the frontline people who are trying to make a difference. But you also depend on donors in order to make that happen. How has it changed your relationship with the donors that now that we're living in this world, and how are you engaging them today versus how you did it even 6 months ago?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And in all the ways that the pandemic has forced us to be more creative, I don't want to say forced us to be more creative. We'd like to think we are creative and innovative and agile. There are many ways that the pandemic has helped us, be what we were built to be at United Way. So we're not dealing with problems that we haven't tried to solve before. And we're built to do this. It's just now on steroids. And that because we have such strong partnerships with our donors and corporate partners and our public sector partners, we were ready to go to respond. And it's just been a matter of figuring out technology like we're with each other today about how do we connect better with our donors and volunteers. And we've been able to do that, I think, in some ways more deeply, because we're all a little less mobile and a little bit more present and seeking out those opportunities to connect. And so we've been doing that through a lot of these kinds of meetings and engaging folks in virtual volunteering and really conducting our business as we need to. I won't say as usual, but as we need to continue the mission.
So do you anticipate, obviously, right now we have to assume we are running a marathon and not a sprint. Do you anticipate, how you engage donors and volunteers, to be significantly different? And what are your plans?
Yeah. So our plans around, in fact, we kicked off our work on our fall campaign earlier today. We're going all virtual. It's really, as we're seeing as the risk of the virus continues, that we absolutely will. Everything that we've been able to do in person, we're shifting to a virtual format for our workplace campaigns, for our donor and volunteer engagement opportunities. So we've been working all summer. The team has been fantastic in re-envisioning all the ways that we can engage our critical volunteers and donors. And we're really excited to roll out those tools. A lot of video assets, working together on online platforms like this. We hosted a virtual volunteerism event a few weeks ago and had hundreds of members of the community respond and build care packages based on needs in the community and delivered those. So we see the commitment of our donors and volunteers really continuing and growing throughout this time.
So did you feel as though the United Way was prepared and ready to go, during this, essentially sudden crisis? And what were your first couple of steps that you did? Because, there's been a lot of discussion about organizations, that leadership matters, and, that in times of crisis, the importance of very clear leadership. How have you been able to do that? And, maybe for the audience, are there 2 or 3 things that you did early on, that set the tone for the rest of the organization?
Well, I think some of our guests know today that I'm only in this position a little bit over a year. So when the pandemic started, it was about 6 or 7 months. And so an incredible test early on in my tenure. But fortunately, because United Way has been so focused on building and cultivating relationships across sectors, we felt like we knew where to call, we knew where to connect, we knew how to mobilize. And before the pandemic really reached our Southwestern PA corner of the world, we had been reaching out to county leadership throughout our service region of Allegheny, Butler, Westmoreland, Fayette, and Armstrong counties, and letting county leadership know that 211 was poised and ready to go to pitch in. United Way was poised and ready to go to pitch in. And that's why we got the call on March 14th that we need you. We need you to step up and help us manage some of this information flow. So we were doing this work a couple of months in advance of when the pandemic hit, and we were ready to go. And I think knowing that that's how United Way is structured and built to operate on a daily basis really helped us make that transition. And fortunately, and I can remember asking this question a year or so ago before I was CEO, well, why does everybody in the organization have to have a laptop? Thank goodness we all did, because everybody picked up their laptops and went on their way, and on March 13th. And so we were fairly, of course, there were a lot of fires to put out, but it felt like we had a good foundation to move forward in response.
So it's interesting you bring up the laptops, because one of the questions that we've received from the audience is really around the speed of communication, and do both of us, how do we think it's impacting dealing with the pandemic and dealing with with other things? I don't know if you want to take a shot at that, and then I can try to take a shot as well.
Yeah, it's certainly so. The speed with which information comes out and changes has been challenging, right? So, how guidance and, as we learn more about the virus, about what we should be doing and how we should be handling it. But I will say that it has been a key part of how we've been able to contribute to the pandemic is that none of us have lived through something like this in our lifetimes. And to be able to have a trusted resource like 211 to call and say, I don't know if I should get on the bus to go to work. I have to go to work at Giant Eagle, or I have to go to work at AHN and at the hospital, and I'm not sure if it's safe for me to get on the bus. What's the guidance? And 211 was there working with the health department to be able to provide those kinds of answers. So that was pivotal. We could not have, it would have been a much different environment if we weren't able to share that kind of information with the public as we had it available.
And by the way, I totally agree with you. I mean, from the healthcare perspective, the speed of communication, the ability to do things like we're doing today has been extraordinarily effective in many ways. What it's done is enabled us to address issues rapidly, assemble teams to problem solve, and to frankly reach around the world looking for solutions. So that piece of it's been really good. The challenge, at least from our perspective, has been around making sure that that you have trusted, reliable sources that you're getting your information from, and people speaking in real time who have credibility. And that's why, to me, the work you're doing, Bobbi, and the United Way does is so important, because you're a trusted source for many people in this community. And so if you tell somebody it's okay to get on a bus and wear a mask and and wash your hands 5 times a day, they may be more comfortable with that than if they're hearing it from other sources. And so I think about it that way as well, and it does become somewhat of a challenge. Mm-hmm. So where do we go from here? I mean, where's the United Way going to go from here? I mean, how do you think we'll as you're developing the plan for the next next United Way campaign and the services you're going to deliver, I mean, where's your head at?
Yeah. So we certainly have learned throughout this first 5 or 6 months of the crisis that emergency basic needs are large in the community and should be our focus. In past years and past campaigns, I think our reach has been much broader. We've talked a lot about a variety of initiatives, but what we're learning across all 4 of our focus areas of helping kids succeed and financially struggling families, giving them more financial stability, and serving older adults and people with disabilities, the common theme across all 4 of those focus areas is the struggle to meet basic needs. So that's really what our campaign is going to focus on this fall, is how do we help people meet those basic needs? And if you think of Maslow's hierarchy, if you don't have that base of having your home, your shelter, your food, and being able to pay your utility bills, then it's really hard to be able to do anything else and take care of anything else in your life. So that's really where our focus is going to be. And we've really had some creative ways that we've been addressing how we meet those needs over the last few months. I'd like to give a few of those examples, because it really speaks to how we connect the dots in the community and work with our partners. Early on in the pandemic, PNC Foundation stepped up and said, how can we help? And we put together, literally overnight, the Student and Family Food Relief Fund, a $1 million grant from the PNC Foundation. And since that grant, we have served over 300,000 grab-and-go meals to kids and their families. And I like to point out when I talk about this, that these meals are in addition to what you've seen with the lines at the food bank distributions, what you've seen from schools doing food programs, and what you've seen from summer food programs. So we're filling the gaps around that, and 300,000 meals so far. But that was a connect the dots. We're working with Eaton Park and other food service programs and the PNC Foundation grant. So that was one of the ways that we creatively problem solved. We also knew that people were struggling to meet their basic needs. We contacted about 10 of our agency partners to serve as emergency basic needs partners. And we were able to raise over $1 million to help directly meet those needs. And we've expended $980,000 of that $1 million already in providing direct grants to meet those emergency basic needs of families. So, paying the rent or helping to buy groceries. Third thing, so if you can get the groceries, how do you get them to people who don't have transportation? And we came up with a partnership with Access, who wasn't driving people to their medical appointments because people were staying home and doing telehealth. We utilized that underutilized capacity to get personal protective equipment out to agencies and get food moved out to individuals who couldn't get out and go shopping on their own. And we've moved thousands of pounds of food and personal protective equipment out that way. So I share those examples because that's the kind of thinking that we absolutely are going to have to continue to utilize and create on the fly as we move into this next phase of the pandemic. So that was kind of a long, I'm sorry, David, that was a dissertation, but I'm excited about it because it just really highlights what I often refer to as the magic of United Way, because we can bring together all the partners to deliver.
Well, I think it's a terrific answer and well worth the long response, because it really reflects what I believe in this region and in Pittsburgh, that we can find unconventional solutions to many of these issues. We're not. It's not going to be easy, and as we go through the fall, we're going to continue to be challenged, and it's going to take bold thinking and creative thinking to do that. So, one of the questions that we've been asked by the audience is, and maybe you can elaborate, but have you ever thought about crowdsourcing, and have you done anything in terms of crowdsourcing as far as problem solving or addressing fundraising or delivery of services?
So we have done some crowdsourcing and peer-to-peer fundraising at United Way. And one of the challenges that we've often faced with it is that our work is so broad. It's not a 30-second explanation about what we do through the Impact Fund. And up until this pandemic, it has been less urgent. So it's not been a hurricane necessarily. But what we have seen locally, and we made the decision very early on in the pandemic not to run an individual fund, but to work with our foundation partners to help direct funds to the Emergency Action Fund. And what that allowed us to do was really then be the beneficiary of some of those funds for 211 and other emergency basic needs projects. But it also really allowed us to do the creative work that I just described. And the irony of all of this is that the money almost raised itself over those first few months. That we've seen, I'm sure Linda would correct me, but I think on the order of about $3 million of crisis funds that have come in since March. And we just also now received a $4 million grant from the county for CARES Act funding to help us continue that student food program. So we've seen about $7 million, $8 million come in emergency funding through our efforts. And again, the irony is that we didn't put a special fund in place, but we did the work that brought the dollars in.
So again, one of the questions from the folks that are listening, when you think about the Basic Needs Fund and and how much has been done so far, how much is left? I mean, is there enough room to get through the next 6 months, or do we need to be out there again trying to figure out what do we do next? I mean, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, well, sadly, there's never enough, right? So we did initially raise in the first wave, as I mentioned, over $1 million, and we've expended about $980,000 of those $1 million in helping sustain summer food programs and the direct emergency basic needs funding that we've provided. In the first couple of months, we had over 1,700 inquiries, referrals for the Emergency Basic Needs Fund. We funded, I believe, about 400 of them. That doesn't mean necessarily that 1,300 individuals didn't get any help, but with our vast network, we're able to connect them to other resources. We really view the Emergency Basic Needs Fund as the fund of last resort. So if there aren't other funds available, we'll use those funds. But the short answer to the question is that's one of the reasons why we're making the Emergency Basic Needs Fund central to our campaign this fall.
I think we're going to have an ongoing need, and it's going to be something that'll be top of mind for all of us. Now, we talked about 2 Category 5 hurricanes. We've spent a little bit of time on one. I thought maybe we could talk about the other for a few minutes, and we certainly can go wherever the audience would like us to go. But obviously, there's been extraordinary events happening after the tragic loss of George Floyd and what happened there, and it has set off a whole chain of events around social justice and that movement. So can you talk for a few minutes about how you think about that and how the United Way is responding and or how it's influenced your decisions, and what effect does it have on the people that you serve?
So as we talk about this in board and staff and in the community, that we have been working to increase our efforts around racial equity for some time now. It has always been part of our United Way mission. This isn't something that we're newly tackling. In fact, this past fall, when the Pittsburgh report on race and gender equity was released, and we all were kind of really standing back on our heels a bit of reading the sentence that a woman could wake up in any other city than Pittsburgh and have a better life across a number of indicators of wealth, income and health. It's distressing to us, because United Way's mission is to fight for the health, education, and financial well-being of every person in every community. So we've been engaged in thoughtful processes internally and externally for my entire tenure and preceding that, about how do we make sure we're living up to that mission across our community. And we've been doing that in 3 key ways, which we are certainly looking at how can we accelerate and do better in. But the first is really supporting high quality partner agencies who are committed to serving people of color and to achieving racial equity. And that's pre-COVID and that is also during COVID. So some of our emergency grants that we distributed during the pandemic were intentionally distributed to smaller grassroots agencies led by people of color, serving people of color that may not have typically gone through the United Way process to get those grants. The second way that we've really committed ourselves to racial equity and racial justice is really also providing technical support and operating support to agencies who are serving the African American community and and people of color. We were a founding member of PACE, which is the Program to Aid Citizen Enterprise that helps African American led organizations, and we fund PACE every year to do that as well. And then I think the third piece, and this is the one that causes us all also to be more deeply reflective, is looking around our organizations, looking at our boards, our staff teams, who's in what position, and really asking ourselves, how can we do better? How can we have people around the table who are making decisions about our community, who represent our community in a more fully representative way? And so we have been actively engaged in that as well. But I will be the first to tell you, we have a long way to go. Our community has a long way to go. But I want everybody who's listening and participating to know that this is not something new to United Way. This is part of the fabric, and we're committed to doing better.
Well, I think we all have a lot of work to do on that front, and I appreciate your candor and the work that you're doing. What's keeping you up at night? I mean, what are the things that are, besides a few obvious things, but what's really keeping you up at night? What's driving your concerns?
Certainly it's the number of people who are vulnerable in our community, and there's not much when we talk about how do we cope with this and adjust to and the pandemic. There's no playbook for this. And there's we can't really plan around an experience. And my concern, though, knowing and having lived through the Great Recession, that it takes years to rebound economically. And we certainly can expect a longer recovery period, particularly as we wait for vaccines and therapeutics to get us out of the immediate crisis. So what keeps me up at night is that there are people who are struggling financially. The eviction moratoriums will eventually run out. Utility moratoriums will eventually run out. I think about older adult programs that help people have a sense of place and a sense of purpose and connection to the community. That's been taken away from them. And how do we make sure people are not isolated and alone and feeling connected to people and know that there are people to help them? So there's a lot that keeps me up at night, but just knowing that if there are people in need and they don't know how to find help, it really is worrisome to me.
One of the things that we've found is that, with this pandemic, obviously the use of telemedicine has been very, very important as people, we're not unsure as to what they should do. And we've had an exponential growth in that, and we've made investments in that, and we're now seeing a continued acceptance of that. The majority of which, by the way, has been for primary care. But behavioral health and addiction medicine and mental health in general has been a dramatic uptake in telemedicine. I mean, as you're in the community and as your teams are out there, what are you seeing from the standpoint of the stress and the mental health and behavioral health? Is there any surprises or any trends that we should be aware of?
It's a good question. And one of the surveys we did with our nonprofit partners was ask the question of, what are your deepest concerns? And aside from the obvious of funding, and actually they mentioned funding after this one, is the concern for the safety and well-being of their customers, clients, consumers, and particularly their mental health and the isolation that they are afraid that will really impact them for some time. So I think that's consistent, David, with what we're hearing from our partner agencies, is that we're doing a lot of work. We have check-in calls we have networks of folks making check-in calls, but 6 months of, I have my parents, I'm fortunate to have my parents still living, and they're going stir crazy. In fact, I think my mother is on the call today, but it's really difficult when you are suddenly, your world has gotten this small. And so I think that's one of the things that we're going to see for some time, is the mental health impact of the pandemic.
Yeah, just as a data point, our mental health and behavioral health telemedicine, is up 120% just from the beginning of this crisis. So, and it's staying up. We're continuing to see that. And I suspect that, with people staying home, watching the news, sometimes, things can close in on them because, there's so much going on out there. So, I've had the opportunity and the privilege to ask you a lot of questions, and, and I really appreciate, you being so candid. Now the question is, what can the community do to help you? I mean, you've got some of the most, effective people in the region on this town hall today. And they certainly have stepped up and participated and worked with you, both in terms of dollars and volunteer efforts. What do you need from the community, and what can we all do to help address some of these needs?
Yeah. And so thanks for that question. It's a really important one. And I think it's really important also to emphasize that we just don't know the scope of what's next. And so I think I saw a question come in, what do we anticipate in terms of evictions as the moratoriums are lifted? It's really, really hard to know that. But I think there was a national estimate that said without relief, 40 million people would be evicted from their homes nationally. How that will play out locally, I'm not sure. What I do know is that as some of this relief is, and these moratoriums are lifted, that more people will be vulnerable. And that's when United Way is needed the most. And we also understand that we're living in a community that has 10 to 15% unemployment right now. So the very folks that we rely on may be experiencing some of these difficulties themselves. And so to the extent that you're able to help us by continuing your contribution to United Way, considering if you can increase your contribution to United Way. Part of our campaign this year is a 110% campaign. So if you can think about an extra 10%, and if you can think about committing that extra 10% to the impact fund first, which gives us a lot of flexibility on where to pivot and invest that, or the financially struggling families area, or emergency basic needs, that would be a key way. But even if increasing your contribution isn't something that you can do this year, volunteering, when we put out the calls to volunteer, and doing that virtually, if you can do that, and simply spreading the word about the work that we're doing and advocating. Right now, we're waiting for the federal government to make some decisions about the fifth relief package. And if something doesn't go through, we will continue to see a spiral with people in need. And so to the extent that you're comfortable or willing to speak to members of Congress, write to members of Congress and advocate as well, that's all very important to us. So giving, volunteering, advocating for public policy that helps us help people is really what you can do for us.
So there's a lot of room for people to help, and and you're pretty flexible on where they help.
Absolutely.
So one of the questions that came in, Bobbi, is really around the long-term senior living centers. Obviously, we both have seen the challenges that they've faced with the COVID-19 crisis. What's the United Way doing in that space? And are there any activities around, their well-being and trying to help that specific category of people?
I'm glancing at the question to make sure that I got all the pieces, but if I didn't, I'm sure you'll redirect me. One of our focus areas is working with older adults, and we fund partner agencies who provide services that meet the social and emotional needs of older adults. And we've been working with those partner agencies to help facilitate thousands of check-in calls with older adults and making sure that they have what they need and that they're doing okay. And in Westmoreland County in particular, our team out there recognized that there were fewer resources to get older adults their groceries, and they worked with local store owners and volunteers, and recruited teams of volunteers to actually go do the grocery shopping and deliver the groceries to those older adults in that particular community. So we've been working closely with our partner agencies who serve older adults to check in, make the connections, send the access van with the supplies or the food if that's needed, and really try to problem solve and meet those needs. But there's no doubt in my mind what a struggle it is for older adults who are isolated right now and who haven't been able to, and if they're in a long-term care facility or an assisted living facility. And we don't necessarily work directly with those types of facilities, but knowing that isolation as well and the demands of not being able to have visitors is just incredibly difficult. But we're working with our partners to be able to address that.
And if I could just add to that, I mean, obviously, in the first round of COVID, the long-term care facilities, and for seniors particularly, were really hit pretty hard, both on a national level and a regional level. So something was introduced called Act 24, which was done with the state, where it's a statewide effort to harden the capabilities around those sites and to provide more resources. And so I'm very proud to say that the Allegheny Health Network and UPMC together, along with Excella and Heritage and St. Clair and Butler and others in the region, are all working together to do that and provide additional resources to wrap around those sites with infectious disease capability, supporting the state in distributing protection equipment, and doing more as we move into this next phase to try to assist and help protect those most vulnerable people. So it really is a combination of clinical expertise and resources, and then the mental and physical and social support that that Bobbi has talked about as well. But the nice thing is the entire region is working together to do that. So other questions from the audience? I mean, otherwise I get to keep asking Bobbi questions, because if I don't, she'll start asking me questions, and then the next thing I know, I'll be on the hook to come up with another 38 million this year. So
David, one of the things that we haven't had a chance to talk about much is what's happening with schools. And I know that has been a really important topic around the community over the last couple of weeks. I didn't see it come through as a question, but I thought it would be good to jump in and talk a little bit about what's happening with a lot of schools being hybrid or completely virtual or some mix thereof, and some kids going back in person. We're really concerned about the learning loss and the social support around those kids and digital access as well. And so we're working with our out of school time partners to be able to help them tap into some additional resources. We're actually working with the Department of Human Services to distribute a couple of $1 million in CARES Act funding to be able to help develop some pod concepts, smaller groups of kids in person, safely in person, as well as virtual pods to support those kids who may be struggling with the disruption in learning. But it is really, the disparities in the educational system are really deeply concerning to us as we move into another year of school disruption.
Yeah, I mean, and I totally agree with you on that. I mean, there's no one size fits all answer to the back to school challenge. And obviously people need to do what they think is right, and and within their communities they'll do what's right. But no question that we have a lot of kids in this region who depend on school to get their one good meal a day. And without, the work that PNC Foundation and others have done with you, there are many of them who would have missed some of those meals, and there's a lot more work to be done. I'm a big fan of, of masks, big fan of washing your hand 5 times a day, and the concept of teaching in pods, where we can get, the right support to be able to help backstop our teachers and our administrators and our families. I think that's critical. And so I'm thrilled to hear that you're doing that work. And certainly there's more work to be done. I know Jerome Bettis is doing quite a bit on trying to get laptops into the hands of underprivileged kids. I know the school systems are trying to do that. But that's a real opportunity for us. And so when we talk about the barriers to success, having access to Wi-Fi and being able to make the connection so they can do the work, or having some place that they can go that's a trusted source for, similar to what's done after school. Those things are fabulous. And the more that we can do there, that, the better off we're all going to be. Because at the end of the day, the more challenges we have there, then the more the healthcare system gets stressed, the more families get stressed, and it has a multiplier effect of developing problems.
Yeah. And we would be remiss if we didn't add as well that the families who are struggling to figure out how to support their kids are families who have to go to work too. And so the economic pressure on the families to try to juggle all, to get to work, but to juggle all of the, I call it, we're now blurring the boundaries between work and home in a significant way. And we've got to figure it out. And, as employers, as a community, we have to figure it out. I
totally agree with you. Okay, so the real question is, how many kids can we put in a pod at your house? And how good are you at math?
Oh no, math is not my subject, but we could have a lot of fun with about 15 kids at my house.
So, one of the questions that always comes up is, how is United Way uniquely positioned to lead on all these fronts and to help address these issues? I mean, what is it about the United Way that is part of the DNA that enables you and the team to be able to have such an impact?
I have really learned, I'm not sure who asked that question, but it's an excellent one, that is really what we are built to do. And so we have a lot of relationships. We have about 1,000 corporate campaigns across our regional footprint. So we're connected to the corporate community. We work closely with the public sector, the Department of Human Services, the Department of Health, our county commissioners in the suburban counties, and the economic development agencies in those counties as well. And that we have these fantastic partner agencies who deliver day in and day out with being stretched on resources. And I do want to come back to that point, but because we are in the middle of, if you can think of it as a Venn diagram, I just told you I wasn't good at math, but if you can think of this as a Venn diagram, and you take all of these circles of these variety of institutions in our community, and United Way is in that space that intersects with all of them. And so we have this unique opportunity to be able to, we need a way to get personal protective equipment to Westmoreland County. Well, the Access Van here, or the Department of Human Services has a connection, or PNC and Eaton Park want to help us get meals to kids and families. So it's that position that we have in between all of the sectors that now more than ever, as financial resources may be, definitely will be more stretched, we have to leverage that special place in the community that we have to connect the dots and help people solve the problems together.
So, I would describe that as a convener strategy rather than you trying to deliver every service yourself and drive around with your backseat of your car full of food. You're getting the smart people in the right places who can be efficient and effective doing that, and you're helping make sure that comes together where the need is at. Is that a fair way to think about it?
Absolutely. We know where the parts and pieces are, and where important partners are, and we can make those connections.
So you referred a minute ago to some of the government funding in this next round, and we just received a question, really trying to understand that. I mean, what is your expectation around additional government funding or support? Is there anything from the state that you see coming, or is this a federal issue? And what do you think that we should do?
This is a national issue. I think those of us who follow such things knows that the state's facing a $4 to $5 billion budget deficit. We're only on a 5-month budget right now, and we can expect cuts coming when they reconvene to develop the balance of the year. On the federal level, where Congress is, I don't even think negotiating right now on the 5th relief bill, but I think it's safe to say that there's going to be less money at a time when we need it more. And what I'm deeply, deeply concerned about is that I know that there's a lot of stress in our human service delivery system here locally, and that most nonprofits don't have even 6 months of reserves on hand. We are 6 months into this pandemic. So I don't think it's unreasonable. I don't want to sound all doom and gloom, but as we move later into the year and into next year, we're going to see fewer providers. We're going to see fewer nonprofits. And in fact, there's been a study done on this already. I don't know who found the time to do this, but a national study suggests that somewhere between 22,000 and 119,975. I don't know how they slice the numbers that specifically, but between 22,000 and 120,000 nonprofits will fold over the next year. So it's really critical that we provide the support to our partner agencies who are delivering these critical services in the community. And whether or not that's financial contribution, advocacy for state and federal funding, we need to be there to make sure they can be there for us.
Well, Bobbi, we're running out of time, and obviously that was a very serious note to end on. But we started with a serious note: a pandemic, social equity issues, a real need for the community, to engage and participate. And it's been a pleasure and an honor working with you and your team. And I speak on behalf of myself and Cindy Hunderfeen, with the United Way campaign this year. And to see the extraordinary outpouring from the community to help solve some of these issues has been amazing, both in terms of dollars and in volunteers. And I certainly want to thank, the premier sponsors, Highmark Health, UPMC, and the small auto group for the work that they've been doing, but everybody who's on this call. And I especially want to thank, you. And I think I joked with you one time before, nothing like taking a new job and walking into a major national crisis and cutting your teeth, while, saving lives. And the work that you're doing at United Way, you and the team, really does save lives and makes a difference that has a long-term impact. So with that said, thank you for the calls today. Thank our audience, which has grown exponentially as while we've been on here. I guess people must have heard that we were much more interesting than Judge Judy is today. But the work that United Way is doing is critical, and we are very grateful for all the support that each of you that's on this call has given. And as you heard, we're all going to be asked to continue to participate and be a part of this. So on behalf of the entire region, thank you to the United Way team, and thank you to all of you who have donated or volunteered time or stepped in the middle of this crisis. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you, David, and thank you, everyone.